Hello, welcome back to Painting with Arty Julie. Today we're going to be looking at a misty scene like this one, and we'll go through it stage by stage, seeing how to build it up into a finished painting. Okay, let's get going. Okay, so I've got 300 gram Bockingford paper down here, and what we're going to do with this little misty landscape is put the background colours on first. The colour choice is entirely up to you, but I've used a little bit of yellow, a little bit of yellow and red to make a pale peachy colour, a bit of blue and red, ultramarine blue and Elysian crimson to give me a purpley colour, or you could use a pre-mixed purple if you wanted to, just a blue, and then a sort of bluey grey colour. You can mix that with ultramarine blue and burnt umber to give you a puddle of grey, but it's quite nice to mix or use something like a Payne's grey or an indigo, so it's a pre-mixed colour for that one. So we're going to put all the background colours on, but the background colour is entirely your choice. If you just want to keep it all pink or different shades of purple, you're more than welcome to. It's your choice with this, because it's going to be your eventual design anyway. So I'm going to wet the paper all over using clean water and a mop brush. This is a nice soft brush. So we want to wet the paper. The board's slightly tilted as usual, so it's the paint runs down the paper and doesn't sit in puddles. So we're just putting this water across here so it's got an even glaze over it. If you want to do it the other way as well to make sure that it's evenly coated, you can do that. But you don't want it sitting in puddles, otherwise it will run everywhere. So I'm just going to tilt the board slightly and make sure that it's evenly coated. It is. It's swimming a little bit in water, so I'm just going to dry my brush and take some of the puddles out of it because it's a little bit too wet. It's just going to go everywhere with this one. So I want a little bit of control with it so it's not too wet. Or you can just pause for a minute and let the water soak in. It's up to you with that. So now I'm going to get a big brush, something like, I don't know, 14 rounds, something like that, and just wet that, take the surplus water out of my brush. I'm just going to go for it with bands of colour coming across here. Start with the palest colours first. So this is just a bit of pale yellow, just a couple of bands going across the foreground, across the background here, sorry. Perhaps put another one in somewhere. This is just going to be the colours that would be in a misty background here. Perhaps put a bit of the orangey colour in, just make it a little bit more interesting. That's next to the yellow, so the yellow doesn't disappear completely. We just have a little bit of that orangey colour coming through, perhaps a little bit closer to where the sun's setting down here, or rising, I should imagine. You get these lovely misty scenes when the sun comes up in the mornings usually. And then perhaps just a little bit of the purpley colour. I don't think I'm going to use that pre-mixed one. Let's just have a little bit of purples in there as well. That's going to look nice and pretty. Band or two of that. Perhaps a bit more at the top here. Excuse me. Perhaps a little bit of the blue colour in there. Don't try and make it too stripy. Let them blend a little bit. I think down the bottom here we want a little bit of a green colour. Just a bluey green colour. Ultramarine blue and a touch of cadmium yellow will give you a greeny colour. This can be your foreground eventually when you come to do that. So just bringing it across here, backwards and forwards. And this is going to be what's behind all your picture. So you can make this as strong or as weak as you like. I think I'd probably want just a little bit of dark at the top. Some of this is going to be the colours I'm going to put in a little bit later on with this. So just keep this going across your picture. This is indigo, or you can use a Payne's grey or a little bit of a darker tone in there just to give you some depth to the top. Try and keep these horizontal. Try not to arc it as you go down here, because it'll look a little bit wrong if it's curved. You want to try and keep them more or less horizontal, these little bands here. And that's probably going to be enough. I'm just going to put this to one side now to let it dry out completely. I think that will probably do. So I'm just going to let it dry completely now. You can dry it with a hairdryer, or you can just set it on one side to let it dry, but it must be completely dry. just before you put it on one side to dry or dry it with a hairdryer, just run a bit of tissue around the edges here, because otherwise you'll get a little bit of paint which hasn't dried on the edges, and this is where you get your cauliflower. So literally just overlap that with a bit of tissue and then you can let it dry out. Right, this is nice and dry now, and it has to be bone dry. If you can dry it with a hairdryer, but it has to be completely dry. Otherwise, as soon as you start working on it, the background colours will start to lift and it all go patchy. So it has to be put to one side, even if you leave it until tomorrow and come back and then work on it tomorrow, the following day. It has to be that dry before you can start working on it. So if you feel a picture of the back of your hand, you can feel when it's slightly cold. That means it's still damp, so you do have to make sure it's dry. So now with this one, I'm just thinking about what I want to fill this area with, and I'm going to put some trees in the background and some perhaps a few little houses. I've just drawn on a little church spire here and a couple of shapes which look a little bit like a church building. I won't draw the trees in there, and a couple of little houses or a row of houses there, but I can develop these as they go along. It doesn't have to, you don't have to draw everything in there straight away, but just put a suggestion of things. So we're going to build this up now in a series of misty layers. So we need to start with the weakest colour first. I'm going to use the same colour throughout now for working with this. We're going to use a weak bluey grey colour for this. You can use a Payne's grey, you can use an indigo, you can use a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, as long as it's nice and bluey coloured, to keep working with it. But what we need to do is keep the top part of the band of colour that we're putting on next, or the layer that we're putting on there, keep that dry, but the bottom part has got to go into a damp paint so that it blurs into nothing. So what you need to do is take a mop brush and some clean water. So I've got some clean water here. Take a mop brush or a biggish brush, a very soft brush if possible. I'm just going to put on, just where I'm going to work now, below that area where I'm going to work, I'm going to put a couple of bands of water. So it's the top part of this I'm going to leave dry. Start with your palest colours first, because they'll be further away. Onto the dry bit, I'm just going to dot on a few shapes which hopefully will look a little bit like a tree. So just keep those fairly open, just an open shape. But as soon as it touches that water, if I can find it, there it is, it should just start to blur away into the water. So it'll just soften out, and then if you just clean your brush, just touch that onto the bottom, you can see how that just blends away into nothing down the bottom here. So it goes into the water. So this part is dry, but that part is damp, not soaking wet, just damp. So I'm going to keep working around here, do some different shapes, trees, bringing them down, touching them into that water. There's a little shrub there perhaps. Clean the brush and just touch it onto that edge. Don't put a wet brush on there, just slightly clean it and just let it blend out. So this will end up being a row of distant trees, as if they're far away beyond all the houses and buildings and things like that, which are, so it's right in the background here. You could put a very distant hillside in there if you wanted to as well. If you make it a little bit stronger with the paint mix, it's just a little bit stronger, you'll get a slightly more distinct tree. It may have a slightly stronger look to it. So it's slightly, just a little bit darker than that one, but again, as soon as it touches this water, don't do it as a band, a straight line across there, just touch it down. So I'm dotting this on and just letting this blur away into the background here. So this is now getting weaker and paler as it comes down here into that water, till eventually it comes down to nothing where I've put the little bit of water on there. I don't even need to clean my brush there, just dry it slightly and just let it fade out. So that's one little layer over that side. So now I can work a little bit more onto this other side. So I hadn't wet it all the way across there, I'd only wet one patch, so I'm just going to go over this bit now. Water, you put it on as low as you like down there, but just flick it on so it's got a little bit of water there. So it's damp, not soaking wet. This side I'm just going to bring in so it's a little bit stronger, but again, perhaps a tree at the top here. Just using my imagination for a few little shapes here. a little bit stronger with the paint mix, but again, as soon as it hits that water, just dotting on a few vaguely tree shapes, I'm just going to can you see how it's just blurring into that background here to give me that misty look to the bottom part of that. And again, just clean your brush, dry it on a bit of tissue and just encourage it to blur into that bottom edge there so it goes to nothing. I'll just move along this bit here and do a little bit more, just letting it blur down, get them different shapes, different sizes, and so it blurs into that background. And again, as soon as it touches that bottom part, this will go behind the church that I've got here. I've just drawn a little church on there, but this is a bit behind it, so it'll just blur away, so you can see this is going to nothing down the bottom there. I'm going to put another band or two down here, same sort of thing, then I'll come back and do a bit more at the top. So I'll just put another band on here, so if you want to catch up with me in a moment, I've done another couple of bands down the bottom here for you to see. Okay, so what I've done now is put several little misty layers in here, so you can start to see this will all be the background parts. So now I'm going to build up another layer on top so I can make my paint a bit stronger. So it's not full strength yet, it's quite a bit stronger, so that's ready and waiting. And again, I'm going to paint this church on here, but I want the bottom of it and the bottom of the buildings to disappear into this soft misty look to it. So now this is dry again. I've just dried it with a hairdryer, so it's now nice and dry. I'm just going to put a band of water across here, quite a broad band of water. Take the water further than you think. And then I'm just going to paint on this little church onto the dry paper at the top here. And then bringing that down, a little bit more of the church here. So this is all just onto dry paper at the top. Into that, if you want to leave a little tiny bit for a window showing through, you can do that. And then perhaps a little bit more of a tree or something either side of it, make that a little bit darker. And then as soon as it touches that water, a bit more uneven, perhaps a little bit more dark into that. Bring it out along here, perhaps another shape or two. Possible tree, and this should be hitting the water here, and it hasn't hit the water yet, so what I'm going to do is just run a bit more water across the bottom there and then just encourage that to run into the water and soften away to nothing. Just going to clean my brush and tickle that in so I don't get another line going across there. It's just softening that edge out, so as soon as it hits that water it blurs away to nothing. Just alter that as I go. So that's another layer in front of that one there. Now before I can do this layer, that layer's got to be dry, so I've got to dry it again with the hairdryer before I move on to the next bit. So that's dry again now, and we need to do another layer in front of it, so I'm going to put a little row of houses in front of this area here. So again, I'm going to make sure that this bit just below the houses is wet. The tops of the houses and the rooftops I'm going to leave nice and dry. Perhaps I'll bring that a little bit further along. So this is staying, but it has to be dry first before you can wet it. Otherwise it'll run into it all over the place. So leaving the top dry, I'm going to paint these little houses, just a little impression of little houses onto that dry paper at the top there. Then as soon as it hits that water, it just blurs into nothing. So I'm just building up this other layer now onto the dry paper, a little bit stronger with my paints than I did previously. So each layer I'm putting in there is just a little bit darker than the last one. So it's quite strong paint now. But as soon as it hits that water, it'll blur out at the bottom there. But keep it dry at the top so you get the shape at the top here. Just turn that into perhaps a little tree or something, a little bit more raggedy than that. And you can just see it blurring away down there, or hopefully you can just see that part blurring into the water. Let's put another little house there, keep that sharp at the top, and then as it hits that water it'll blend to nothing. Down the bottom, hopefully looking like the banks of the gentle dawn mist or evening or whatever it is, that's time of day when you get that lovely atmospheric conditions over the hillsides in the background. And then it will just bring that down here. Just encourage that to run into there a little bit more and let that go. Let's make that a little bit more twig-like, I think. So that's those. I can move along this edge. This is starting to dry now, so I just need to get my paints a little bit stronger, a little bit richer now, because I want to make these a bit darker. So a bit more ultramarine blue and a bit of burnt umber makes a nice strong dark, or saying the indigo will do just as well with that. And as this is just starting to dry out, I'm just going to flick on a little bit more underneath here. So then I can bring, don't rub it too much when you're doing that. So I'll perhaps put another, I don't know, a couple of tree shapes on here. Get that a bit stronger. Distant trees, over the background ones which are now dry. Keep the, even if you're doing trees, don't make them too solid. Always leave little bits of light in between them. Down to that edge where it's hitting the water, and just put a little bit of hint of that bottom edge to it. Perhaps we have another tree coming up here somewhere, but this is entirely up to you of how big your trees are, what sort of shapes you're putting into them. I usually get my little tree book out and look for all sorts of silhouettes of different shapes of trees to give me an idea of different things to put in here. And then just bring that along as if it's reaching the bottom there. So that's another layer done. So I just need to move forward again. I probably need to dry it a little bit now before I move on to another layer coming forwards here. So I'll just give it a quick blast again with the hairdryer. Okay, just another couple of layers, and then we'll just do the foreground part. Just put a little bit more onto here. So perhaps another band of trees somewhere spanning this mid distance here. So I'm just putting a bit of water across there so the bottom edge of that blurs away. And again, we're thinking of different shapes of trees, making them slightly bigger this time. So they touch up a little bit further again and make the paint a bit stronger. So as you come forwards, they'll get a bit darker, a bit more like a silhouette. Bringing these down, perhaps just dotting this onto the dry paper at the top here. That's a sort of pine tree, but then as soon as it gets down to the bottom here, it'll start to blur because it's hitting the water and start to look misty. Ooh, a bit too much paint. Misty at the bottom there. So you can just give a little bit of a hedgerow or something like that into the bottom. Let's do another couple of trees like that. Nice and strong with your paint mix now. Perhaps with a different shape, perhaps a pine tree or something. A little longer, thinner one. And again, getting it down to the bottom here where it starts to blur away, somewhere around here. Just put a little bit more water on just below that. There we go. So it just blurs into that bottom edge. And perhaps a couple of slightly bigger ones, or different shaped ones in front of that, if I make that a bit stronger, a bit more rounded shape perhaps to them, to give them a bit of variation on these trees. A bit stronger down here. And this isn't quite blurring enough down here, so run a little bit of water along that bottom edge just to make it sure it goes away into the water there. It's wet all the way down to here, but I'm not painting as far as the water is, and just dot that across the bottom into that water's edge to give me a little bit more of a hedgerow. Perhaps just another couple of these. It's working away across here, making sure this is wet where you want it to blur away and drier at the top. So just think about a different shape of tree, slightly bigger one. Again, perhaps the tree book is quite useful to look at different shapes. Keep them open so it's not too solid a lump in there. And then bringing this down. Into that misty bit. And again, just dotting it out now. Letting it blur. As if it's a little hedgerow coming out towards their bottom, and it's just drifting off into the mist down the bottom here. A few little bits on this end, I don't know, just little shrubs and things like that, and then we'll give it another dry in a moment. One a bit taller. Just to give you the edge of that one. This is nice. I like the way that's blending away there. It's just merging into that damp paper now, so it's got a really misty, mysterious look to it. You just keep touching that in while it's still slightly damp to give you the look of the little hedgerows and things upon that edge there. So we just need to do just a fraction more in the foreground. So I'm just going to put these horses on, or something here to draw your eye into the foreground. Might want to put another tree there, but let me just put the horses on. Make sure that's dry. You might need to dry it again with a hairdryer, but I think for me it's just about dry around here. So onto the dry paper now. I'm just going to put a little bit of more shaping in with these horses. I've pre-drawn these on there, so I draw them onto a scrap piece of paper first and then just transfer them over, save rubbing out on your piece of paper. So just with your stronger paint now, we're just putting onto dry paper the little shapes of the silhouette of the horses. But you don't have to put horses, you could just put another tree, or don't have to worry about putting anything on there really, just bringing it down into the foreground, just a little gateway perhaps or something. There, oh, it looks a bit knock-kneed now, that poor horse, but there, it's not too bad. Perhaps he's a donkey rather than a horse, but something in the foreground there anyway. Have another one just bending down, feeding, just in the early morning mist there. Perhaps cross-legged horse. Make sure this is paint's a little bit stronger now because it's into the foreground. You want a nice strong silhouette on there. Okay, a little slightly weaker bit, we'll have a little bit of a shadow underneath here. Just again soften that with just a little bit of water, because otherwise it'll just look too hard. And that is pretty well it. You might just want a flick or two of water on here just to soften that down. And I don't know, you could put another little bit of foreground here, perhaps a tiny little bit of a hedgerow coming in, just to give that a little bit more shaping, just to balance out where those horses are. Just a little bit of something into the blurry water here. And even perhaps a fence post or two into the light there. You can just play generally then, put different things in, keeping them all nice and soft. That fence won't keep a horse in, will it? But never mind, we can just leave it. Something like that. I hope you enjoyed doing that. Don't forget you can pick up the handout sheets and any other instructions on my website artyjulie.com, and don't forget to subscribe for more YouTube clips like this. Thank you.